Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be looking at the other side of broker transparency. I know this is a topic we have talked about a lot, but I always had a question. Why are broker groups, not brokers themselves, but the groups that represent them, so against it, except for the obvious argument of, I don't want you to see what my margins are? Many groups argue that this is going to be the race to the bottom that will affect carriers. So I decided to research, explore, and present what I have found to you guys. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic. Ready? Let's go. So let's go ahead and take a look at where people stand. And we're going to start with truckers. And truckers, for the most part, not everyone, but for the most part, they argue that broker transparency is going to give them leverage in negotiations. Now, one question that is always asked is, how is it possible to gain leverage in negotiations if technically, if broker transparency were enforced, you would only receive the rate that was paid to the broker after delivery? Well, broker transparency does empower truckers in a few ways. Number one is future negotiation leverage. Very quickly, if broker transparency were enforced, carriers and truckers would start seeing a pattern of which brokers take higher margins, which brokers take lower margins. And that will give them an ability to either negotiate more with those brokers that they know usually take higher margins because they technically have more in the load, or perhaps they will be able to weed out brokers that they do not want to work with anymore. Number two, and this is a big one, is of course market awareness. If transparency would become a thing, then carriers would really quickly realize where shippers are actually paying more in what markets for their equipment type, where brokers are taking higher margins, and where their negotiating power lies. So even without real-time negotiation power, post-delivery transparency is a tool for accountability as well as market intelligence. All right, we talked about truckers and carriers, so now let's talk about where do brokers stand on this issue. And it's plain and simple. They do not want it. The obvious reason is the fact that they don't want to suffer from lower margins. Freight brokers often resist transparency because it protects their competitive edge as well as their margins, right? By keeping rates, carrier payments, customer payments opaque, brokers maintain leverage in negotiations and they avoid the scrutiny over their marked up prices. But again, something that brokers, as well as some carriers, it's a very small group of truckers and carriers that think this way, but there is a group that does exist, and that group says that broker transparency will inevitably lead to a race to the bottom, which will affect carriers. So I was always wondering, what do they mean? Let's go through this argument. Number one, increased price competition. Transparency would obviously reveal what brokers charge customers versus what they pay to carriers. And if shippers start seeing higher broker margins, which are from 15 to 30 and sometimes even higher, that's the percentage, right? Shippers might get upset and start asking for lower rates. And brokers under pressure to keep their client base, right? They don't want to lose that shipper, might pass these savings to shippers by offering lower rates, which could inevitably reduce carrier pay to keep their broker margins viable. Number two, and this is the reason used in the race to the bottom argument, if post-delivery transparency exposes rates, obviously shippers will find out about it and shippers are going to try and work with carriers directly. Now, it's funny how they say it because they don't say, oh, we're going to lose customers. No, what they say is shippers will start leveraging the data that they found, saying that, hey, carriers usually take much lower than what we think we're paying them. So they will put even more downward pressure on the rates, and carriers dealing with a shipper might accept those lower rates to build a customer relationship, which would inevitably drive the rates down. This argument is funny, right? The brokers are saying that, no, it's not about us losing customers. It's about the fact that carriers cannot be trusted not to take those low rates, which will screw up the market even further for everyone else. So yeah, just an interesting little observation. Reason number 3, post-delivery transparency could allow shippers to analyze historical data and use it to negotiate lower rates in future contracts. For example, if a shipper sees that a carrier they have worked with has accepted before $2 per mile to run a lane, this is something that brokers do as well, so be careful about taking those cheap rates because it's very hard to renegotiate with a broker. But if shippers look at historical data and see that, hey, this carrier took $2 per mile, they might be reluctant to raise that price for that same lane, regardless of the fact that the market has changed. And number 4, and please bear with me on this one because I'm just giving you the reasons why they're saying this is a race to the bottom. I know a lot of you will be like, I don't care about this reason, but just hear me out. They say that transparency is going to hurt the smaller broker who relies on higher margins but lower volumes than those larger brokers. And this will drive them out of business. So the argument is that larger brokers like, for example, TQL or CH Robinson, they are able, due to their size, right, and the technology they have and the carrier network they have built, they are able to survive on smaller margins if necessary. And if smaller brokers start leaving the industry because they cannot survive, these giants basically take all the control and start dictating market conditions and market prices. So if you're like me and your brain works in the same way, my first question was like, how is it possible that smaller brokers take larger margins? I mean, it makes sense, right? Volume versus margin. If they're not getting as much volume, they're probably making up for those losses somewhere. Because usually smaller brokers pay much better than big brokers like TQL, for example. Well, it's very simple. Small mom and pop brokerages, they also compete for carriers, right? While TQL has like a huge carrier network and a ton of carriers to choose from at any point, a smaller broker has to compete. So a small broker might try to entice a carrier to move their load for a higher rate per mile, especially in a tight market, because they're not only trying to secure carrier capacity, but they're also trying to build a relationship. So an example of how this would work is, for example, a small broker gets a load from a shipper for $3,000 and sells it for $2,100 to a carrier, making a 30% margin on that load. And then we have TQL, who buys that same load for $2,500 but sells it for $2,000 to the carrier, 20% margin. So the smaller broker got a 30% margin, which is higher than TQL's, right? But they also paid $100 more to the carrier. And this is again done very often because smaller brokers don't have the same volume, right? But personally, just off topic, I enjoy working with smaller brokers. As I said before in one of my videos, I have several of them I have built a relationship with. They're tiny mom and pop brokerages, and yeah, they usually pay much better and they actually care about relationships, and you usually talk to the same person each and every time, which is nice. Now, of course, the big guys, what are shippers saying about this whole thing of broker transparency? Well, it's a mix. There is one group that strongly opposes broker transparency, and this is because they don't want their rates to be seen by their competitors. They're afraid that broker transparency will lead to leaks, right, from either brokers or carriers on what a shipper pays for a certain load, for a certain lane. And if this information leaks to their competitors, those competitors will be able to undercut that particular shipper, right, and win business. Then there's another group of shippers that is very, very excited about the potential of broker transparency because they also are very curious to see what brokers take as margins, because they see this as an opportunity to save money. So this, by the way, is what a lot of people are afraid of. Most brokers and some carriers, right? This is the argument. The moment shippers smell that they can save money, they will start suppressing rates even further. Now, at a broker who is not going to let go of their client that easily, he might take a cut in his margin, right? So add a broker to the mix where a shipper now is paying less. The broker might have a smaller margin because of transparency, but that broker is still in the mix. The carrier is getting paid diddly squat. This is the argument predominantly used when they describe of this potential race to the bottom. Now, if you have been watching this channel for a while and we have talked about broker transparency a lot, you already know where I stand. I completely understand the carriers and truckers who are really gung-ho about broker transparency. However, I am more neutral in this sense, and this is because I just don't care what a broker makes as long as I get paid what I need to get paid, right? So for example, this week I grabbed a load that was paying $1,500 for 340 miles. That is a good rate per mile. It was a light load, no tarp, and honestly, in that situation, you're not going to see me worrying about, well, what did the broker get from the shipper? How much did they actually have in that load? So the question is, what do you guys think after watching this video? I'm curious to hear the thoughts. I know that a lot of people are for broker transparency, but do you guys see any potential consequences to broker transparency if it was enforced? What do you see happening? Do you think it's just going to be all good for carriers in every market in the United States? Do you think there are going to be some unexpected surprises? Do you think nothing is going to change, or is it going to get worse for carriers if this was enforced? Curious to hear your thoughts. And of course, if it were enforced, how would you use that broker transparency to benefit your business operations? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching and joining and watching today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.